In today's video, I'm going to be sharing with you my birth story with Brooks, telling you all about kind of anything that was the same as my birth with Brooks and my birth with Ava, and then just kind of telling you the whole process of labor and delivery with my son. So I'm just going to jump in and start with a little bit of a background about Ava's birth. Also, she is sitting in the living room with me, so we'll see how this goes. This is the literal only time I could film this video. I've been trying for a week and I just cannot get any overlap of sleep where I'm not holding a baby or kids aren't awake. It's just like, it is what it is. I was induced at 39 weeks per my doctor's request because she was concerned that Ava was gonna be super big. She kept being like, I don't want you to have an 11-pound baby and then need a C-section, which as a first-time mom, this was my first pregnancy, birth, everything. That freaked me out a ton, so I just listened to her. The second time around, I switched clinics. I went with a midwife. It was just a totally different experience, and it's totally fine to get induced. A C-section, sometimes it's necessary. Sorry, I had to clear the memory card. So sometimes it's medically necessary, and that's totally fine, but in my case, it was more out of fear that I ended up doing that. And my daughter was 8'2" at 39 weeks, so definitely not too big. So if I were to go back, I would do things a lot differently. But I got the Foley balloon inserted, which helps you dilate, and that's supposed to take about 12 hours. It took 3 hours for me, and then I started bleeding quite a bit, so I had to basically go right to the hospital. We were in triage for 6 hours. I hadn't eaten in so long because I was uncomfortable the night before, up, like crampy, not feeling good, and my body does not do well when I'm not nourished. I have to eat or I get really nauseous, I dry heave, I throw up. It's like I have to eat. So this was a bad situation for me. So I went into it just like, it went right when I got the Foley balloon. I instantly got intense contractions 2 minutes apart. They send you home. Right when I got home, I started bleeding heavily, so they wanted me to come right back to the hospital. And then we were in triage for 6 hours, just waiting for me to progress because we couldn't get admitted to the hospital until I reached 4 centimeters. So we were in there for 6 hours, and then I finally reached 4 centimeters. We got admitted. After 8 hours, I think, of labor, I got an epidural. It was like midnight that night. And then labor was very slow with Ava. I couldn't move. You have an epidural, you're on your back, you're just laying in bed. It was taking me a really long time to progress. I think I was at an 8 or 9 centimeter for like 3 hours before I could finally push. And then I was pushing for 2 hours. They had to use the vacuum to get her out. I had multiple 2nd-degree tears and an episiotomy, which, if you don't know, is when they have to cut to get the baby out. So I had an intense recovery. It was a very difficult labor and delivery. So then postpartum, I was extremely swollen. I could like shake my leg and you would hear the water swish in my foot. I was so swollen with her. Okay, I changed the camera angle a little because I felt like I had to keep like going on my tiptoes to be in the frame. But anyways, so my recovery with her was really hard. I had just so much going on down there, and also all the swelling, which was so painful actually, and just really uncomfortable. So that's kind of what I was coming from, was that birth experience. So the second time around with my son, I got a midwife. I did a whole different clinic just because I didn't have the best experience with my doctor and I wanted to try something else, and a midwife was definitely the way to go for me. I had such an amazing experience using a midwife, and this time I was adamant I really wanted to just go into labor naturally if possible, and I only wanted to get induced if medically necessary. I went into labor at 40 weeks, 3 days, and I remember it was like 11 in the morning. I went and I got adjusted. My brother's a chiropractor, so I went and got adjusted, and then when I came back, I just been feeling crampy, kind of like period crampy when like your back is achy and you have like the abdominal crampiness. And I went to the bathroom and there was like a little bit of blood when I wiped, and I was like, is this the bloody show? If you haven't had a baby, bloody show is like a tinge of blood that happens when your cervix is changing. So it indicates a change. So like dilation, things are happening. Of course, if you have like a ton of blood, that can totally be something else, but this is like, I was so excited because by 40 weeks, 3 days, I was ready for him to come out. I was very impatient. and just so ready. And I had nothing to compare timelines to because my daughter, I was induced with her, so I had no idea when my body kind of naturally wanted to start labor. So this time around, 40 weeks, 3 days is when it happened, and I started feeling crampy, and then throughout the day, every time I go to the bathroom, there'd be just a tint of blood, and then I started to get more actual contractions throughout the day. Nothing that I couldn't like walk through, talk through, that kind of thing, but they did start to become where I was like, okay, this is a real contraction. They're coming semi-regularly. They'd be like 3 minutes apart, 5 minutes apart, 10 minutes apart. They were irregular, but they were coming. But the thing that was really hard is they were 30 seconds. So the rule is kind of having a contraction for a minute, 5 minutes apart for an hour. That's when you go in. And mine were just 30 seconds. And with Ava, I went straight into intense contractions, and they were a minute long. Like, I just was thrown straight in. With this, my body was doing the steps to gear up to that, and I hadn't experienced that the first time, so I really had nothing to compare it to. And I think it makes such a huge difference in the efficiency of your birth, letting your body do the steps to actually like naturally progress labor. So starting with that crampiness, getting that dilation going, moving into the contractions that were shorter, not quite as regular, and then by evening, my mom came over because she was going to be the one to watch Ava if we went to the hospital, and I was like, you don't need to come. I'm definitely not going into the hospital tonight. They're only 30 seconds. Like, they were close together. They were like 3 to 5 minutes by evening time, but they were only 30 seconds, and I was like, we're not going in tonight. But she's like, I'd rather come at 5 p.m. than at 3 a.m. if something does happen. And I was convinced, because my labor with Ava was like 24 hours, that we were not going to go into the hospital. But it is a really good thing that she came, because I think it was like 5, 6 p.m. and my mom's like, why don't you go walk on your treadmill and just try to get those contractions more regular, because they were just not consistent. They would come, they'd be really painful, and then they would kind of like stop for 30 minutes, and then they would come again, and I was like, they just won't stay consistent. And so I went and walked on the treadmill for 30 minutes, and then they did become really consistent. Walking is really good for doing that with contractions. So they were pretty much 3-ish minutes apart, 3 to 5, but they were painful, but 30 seconds and not unbearable. So I was like, okay. So then by evening, like after Ava had gone to bed and stuff, they had slowed down again. So I was like, okay. And we had just kind of stayed up with my mom, and it was like 11:30 at night, and I was like, all right, I'm just gonna go to bed. I tried everything I could. I was bouncing on the ball. I was doing all of these like movements. I was doing optimal positions for labor. I was walking. I was like, okay, I've done everything I can to progress this naturally. I'm just gonna go to sleep now. And I woke up 2 hours later, so we did not get much sleep the night before my son was born. It was like 1:30 in the morning. And I was like, whoa, these are painful. So it was like, had ramped up to very painful contractions, so much so that I needed to go sit in the bath. It was like 1:30, my mom's asleep on the couch, and I'm like tiptoeing into our bathroom making an Epsom salt bath. Laying in there working through the contractions. I was really adamant that I wanted to labor at home as long as possible this time. I wanted to use my ball, use my bath, do different positions, be in the comfort of my own home, eat, do those things. Also at this time, I was going to the bathroom a lot. TMI, I was pooping so much. That's actually very normal before you go into labor or when you're in labor. Your body's trying to like clear the system. So it's very normal to poop a lot, and I was pooping so much. So I was like, okay, this is clearly real labor happening now. And I woke up then and I was like, okay, so these are very painful, but they're 30 seconds. They're very close together. They were like 2 to 3 minutes apart, but they were only 30 seconds. And he's like, let's go. I'm like, no, they're only 30 seconds. That threw me off. So I was like, okay, I'm just gonna labor at home a little bit more. We'll just feel it out, see how it goes. And Ben's like, I don't want to have a baby in the car, Rachel. And I was like, we're fine. Ava's labor was so long. Well, I would say about 4:30 or 4:30, all of a sudden something flipped. They were very painful, and I was like, yeah, I think we need to go. And Ben was like, okay, yes, let's go. So thank goodness my mom was here, because she was there for Ava when she woke up. And we got to the hospital and they checked me, and I was at a 5. And with Ava, it took me like 6 hours to get to a 4. And it had been like 3 hours of like the actual painful, consistent contractions. So it was so fast. I was like, oh my gosh, this is happening really quick. I was so happy. But it was funny because I went into it wanting to do a natural labor, or wanting to do no epidural. And I got in the waiting room with Ben and I was like, remember how I wanted to do no epidural? Ha, that's funny. I'm getting an epidural, because they were so painful. And the pain level my contractions were at was definitely beyond the pain that I was at when I got my epidural with Ava. So I had never experienced this level of contractions, and I was like, I'm getting an epidural, this is insane. So we get into the actual room, we get admitted. At that point too, when they checked me, my water was leaking, but it wasn't all the way broken. And so I think that also sped things up a little, because over the next hour, I went from a 5 to an 8, having contractions a minute apart or less. Sometimes I didn't barely have a break. They were just like stacked on top of each other. And when we first got into the waiting room, they were like, okay, we're looking at probably like a 2 to 8 hour labor, but definitely probably the tail end of that too would be like crazy, is what they said. And within the 1 hour, I had gone from a 5 to an 8, which was just insane, because this was so different than with Ava, which is why I feel like letting your body gear up and do this process makes it so much more efficient. So these contractions were otherworldly painful. I was moaning like an animal. I was like falling into Ben, breathing through everything, like trying to do all the tricks of like expanding and giving into it and moaning through it and stretching and swaying and doing all those things. I was really happy that I was able to be mobile, that I didn't have to be laying on my back, that I could move around, use the ball, sway, do whatever I wanted to do. It was so insanely painful. I've never felt pain like this before, but it was moving so quickly that I was like, you know what, it's not even worth getting an epidural because we're moving so quick. And I didn't want it to slow it down. I didn't want to interrupt the process, but also it was so intensely painful that I don't think I physically could have sat for an epidural anyway. So that's when I did not get one. And they checked me because at 8, I was like, I feel like I need to push. So they're like, let's check you. And they're like, okay, you just have like a little bit of the water bag in front. They're like, we can wait for it to break, or we can break it and it'll just happen. It'll happen on its own, or we can do it and it'll just move quicker. And I was like, okay, just do it. But I was like, isn't that gonna make these way more painful? And they're like, yeah, the bag of waters is absorbing a lot of the pain of the contraction. And I was like, I can't fathom these being more painful. And I had said to Ben many times, I can't do this, I can't do this. And he's like, yes, you can. He was the biggest support in the entire world. You need a support person, especially with no epidural, to get you through the mental part of it as well as physical, because especially at that point, like, there was no going back. I had to do this, and accepting that like this is going to get more painful and I have no way out other than through is really mentally difficult to do. But I had worship music playing, I had Ben there. They were like, this is your birth, you do whatever you want. So I had my worship playlist going, and I was just like, not that I even could hear anything. I was so in my own zone. Okay, sorry, the memory card filled up. So I was so in my own zone, I don't even think I knew what was happening around me. But then they broke the water bag, and I had one contraction between that and pushing. And I remember I was laying on my side on the bed, and I clung to the bed in like writhing pain. And I might just be a wimp, that, I mean, maybe other people didn't experience this. And then I started pushing. I pushed on all fours. I pushed on my side, holding my leg up. I did not want to labor, or I didn't want to push on my back, because I just didn't feel like that's not letting gravity help you at all. So I wanted to have optimal positions for my body and gravity helping me. So I was pushing for 30 minutes with Brooks. With Ava, it was 2 hours. I did not need the vacuum for him. I heard it. Okay. But they did have to shoot me in the legs with whatever they give you when you bleed too much, because I did have a lot of bleeding when he came out, because he was 8'10", so I had a big baby. Pushing is what's really, really hard for me, because I have big babies. It is just like so hard. A lot of people say it's like a relief, it's like the easier part. Contractions are super, super painful, but pushing is like physically hard. Like, it feels like you're just pushing a boulder out that won't budge no matter how much you push. I broke so many blood vessels, like popped so many in my face from pushing so hard. I looked at myself after birth and I was like shocked. I was pushing so hard and it was just like, felt like the hardest workout I've ever done in my life. I was drenched in sweat. I remember when he came out, I literally just like laid there. And I gave birth on all fours. And then, like I said, on my side holding my leg. But I remember I would just like collapse onto the bed between pushes because I was so exhausted. But it was less than 30 minutes. And he came out and he was perfect and beautiful and wonderful. And it was like such an empowering experience. I couldn't even believe that I did that. Like I never thought, I always dreamed of doing a birth without an epidural, but I didn't think I actually could. And the fact that I did that, I felt like the strongest person in the entire world. And I will say, it felt so much better. It was so much harder because the pain was so much, but pushing, I could actually feel what was going on. I could feel what was working. I had one tiny 1st-degree tear, which is totally different than my first birth because I couldn't feel anything when I was pushing with Ava. With this birth, with Brooks's, I did have that ring of fire they talk about for a minute when they're crowning and it's like that first stretch, and I remember like yelling like this hurts, and they were like push into the pain, and you do, and you get past that barrier, and then it's like you can feel your baby coming out and you can feel what's working, and it's so much better for actually like efficiently getting this baby out, in my opinion, in my experience. And my recovery was so much better. I didn't swell at all. I don't know if my body just didn't react well to the epidural the first time or what, but I didn't swell at all. I recovered so much quicker. I didn't have as much going on down there to heal. And my body just felt good. Not good, I needed to recover, but it just felt like different in a really good way. So that pretty much sums up my birth with Brooks. Completely different than my birth with Ava. My birth with Ava was amazing because it wasn't painful, and it was just different in that way where it wasn't as intense, but Brooks's was so intense but so like empowering. And I have 2 beautiful healthy babies, and I am really proud of both births and pregnancy and getting through all of that. It is a marathon. Pregnancy, birth, postpartum. It is a marathon, and we women are incredible. I remember my husband just being like, how did you do that? And having someone be able to be there with you and be your support is so important. So that is my birth story. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them down below. I'd love to answer any questions. Now that I've been through 2 births, I would definitely do it this way again if I have the choice to. And it was just totally different, but really, really good. It was harder, but better. So that is my birth story. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please give it a like or a comment, and please subscribe. I will see you guys in my next video. Bye.
Bye. Love you. Yeah.
Bye. Love you.